Our final first speaker this afternoon is, of course, Philip Adams. There's no one in the room, I'm sure, who doesn't know Philip. We've all grown up with him. I remember when the first edition of The Australian came out, there he was, and he's still there. Not that I buy it anymore, but I've heard he's still there. Philip is a very, very famous person. He's elected one of Australia's 100 living national treasures, the first time they did that by the National Trust in 2006. And Robert Mann says of Philip, he's the most remarkable broadcaster in the history of this country. I think he's been, of course, a consultant to prime ministers and premiers. He's been an amazing figure in the Australian film industry. I think I've still got The Adventures of Barry Mackenzie, a sort of comic book somewhere at home that he supervised the filming of. He's the chairman of the advisory board of the Centre for Mind at the University of Sydney and the ANU in Canberra. He says here that he's interviewed over 15,000 of the world's most prominent politicians, philosophers, economists, scientists, theologians, historians, archaeologists. I mean, everyone Philip's interviewed. What an interesting life this guy's had. He's got 2 Orders of Australia, not just one, dozens and dozens of other awards, and honorary doctorates as long as your arm. And so we're so very, very privileged to have you with us here today, Philip. Thanks very much.
I've rarely felt as privileged to be at a conference as I have today. I passed a note to Gillian before saying you were wonderful, and Gillian, you were. Thank you too to the 2 Richards, and to Simon, and to Ken. For me, in some ways, to Ken in particular, as I'll tease out shortly. I am a lifelong atheist. Look, I just want to do a quick poll here. How many people sitting here would describe themselves as atheists? Surprise, surprise. Okay. Although I'm an atheist, I long since parted company with Dawkins and my late friend Christopher Hitchens, in that I do not revile the religious. I understand the impulses, the yearnings that religion, and the fear that religion seeks to deal with. In fact, I borrow a word from my religious friends, which I find of profound importance. In fact, I think it's the most important word in our language, and that word is numinous. It's the feeling of awe and dread that you get when you walk out into the back garden at night, and if you can see the stars, and that's getting harder and harder in a polluted world, is that feeling of absolute, infinite astonishment.
Philip, a request to eat the microphone a bit more.
Like, what, closer?
Yeah.
Okay. The sense of the numinous is, I think, fundamental to human experience. It's gazing up into the night sky and having that sense of awe and dread. Now, when I gazed up into the night sky at the age of 4, almost 70 years ago, I apprehended a world of total meaninglessness, infinite both ways, but meaningless. I couldn't see the point of God, and I was overwhelmed by a sense of personal mortality, and I've been obsessed with it ever since. I think I've written on death at least as much as anyone else in the country, and for decades I used to go back and back to it at various newspapers, because I think the denial of death is what creates almost all forms of human misery. We date civilization from the moment you see the denial of death, and we see it when bodies are buried with strange ceremonies. It is that fear of death, that denial of death, which built the pyramids, which built the cathedrals, and in a strange way also built the hospitals. It is our dread of mortality that drives us. It drives us into religious denial. It drives us into science. It drives us into music. It drives us into art. Almost everything we do is determined, I think, by the fact that human beings are, as far as we know, the only creatures that comprehend, that apprehend their own mortality. And that is why We have to face the problems of those who oppose us. The reason that people oppose assisted suicide, call it what you will, is because it confronts and affronts their own personal dreads and terrors. And this is where I think Ken is absolutely right. You have to have some sympathy with it. Not everyone has the joy, the freedom of atheism. And not everyone is as smart as we are. So we have to extend our understanding and our compassion. And coming back to the last question that was asked, I would hate to live in a world where anyone in the medical profession of any level was forced to be involved in euthanasia if they didn't want to. Not on. It is such a profound feeling, and one cannot entirely dismiss the medical ethic which seeks to prolong and protect life. It is a great and glorious thing, but we must in fact have the choice. All I've ever asked for, all anyone ever asks for, is that thought of control over one's own dying. One of the happiest events I ever attended was Philip Nitsky's anniversary bash at the National Museum in Canberra, where it was the oldest audience I've ever addressed. And the most joyful. Here were people, you know, nonagenarians, octogenarians, by the hundreds, all bussed down to Canberra. And boy, we had a terrific night. We had a terrific night because we were rejoicing in our feeling that we were entitled to this decision. That it wasn't something that we were going to let a politician or a cardinal or anyone else tell us what to do. But I remember looking at them and I thought, it's interesting. All of you here profess a conviction in voluntary euthanasia, but that doesn't mean for a minute that all of you will exercise that right when the time comes. This is the lie of the slippery slope. Life clings to life. It's hardwired in us. We fight to survive. In a death camp, people fought to survive. People crash in the Andes in an aeroplane and they eat the corpses around them rather than die. That's how strong the will to live is. And I know many people, not many, I know probably a dozen, who were lifelong supporters of voluntary euthanasia, but who in the end wanted their lives prolonged. We're not making it compulsory, we're making it an option. We're granting people the right to make a decision. You were talking about morphine. I've woken up in quite a few intensive care units in the last few years. I've had any number of quite amusing near-death experiences lately. And these days, after you've had a major surgery, you're on a drip, you're on a morphine drip, but it's one you control yourself. You've got a little button to push. And I am told that having that little button means that people don't use more morphine, they tend to use less, because you've got that control. You're in control of your own life. Now, I would simply like to have, if it's not morphine, something else available and a little button that I can press happily and render myself oblivious. I agree with you. Going under is really quite congenial, and I've been under so often. I now belong to the land of the horizontal. I spent a lot of my life looking up from gutters as ambulance drivers look down at me. I've become familiar with the roofs of ambulances. I know the tops, the ceilings of hospitals, you know, with the smoke alarms and the lights and the little sign saying turn left for orthopaedics. You know, the horizontal world is now familiar, but it is not particularly terrifying. But given my druthers, I'd much rather die at home with my head in the lap of someone who gave a tuppenny damn for me than in the clinical bleak hospital context. All I ask, and I think all of us are asking, is that right? It's that right to make that choice. We may not, in fact, exercise that right. That's also our right. It's, you know, I've got a whole list of political beliefs, but when push comes to shove, I sometimes compromise them. I sometimes change my mind. And I acknowledge that totality, the deep, profound, visceral, intellectual, wired-in totality of our desire to stay alive. Do not deride the sincerity of those who oppose us. That's a big mistake in any issue. In any issue. In fact, sometimes our worst enemies are the people we agree with. Think about that. That's I don't know why I said that, and it may even be profound, but in politics it's true. The greatest and most vicious fights in Australian politics are not between political parties, but within them. Within them. It's why I resigned from the Labor Party when my friend Mr. Rudd was assassinated. Rudd, a God-botherer, a very serious God-botherer, on many issues on our side, and on many issues there are nuns and priests and Jesuit intellectuals all over the country who agree with us. That's an important point. Being a Catholic doesn't mean you go along with the Pope or Cardinal Pell. In fact, most Catholics can't stand the Pope or Cardinal Pell, which is why they pop pills, you know, those pills, as though they were jelly beans. And so, you know, it's not a yes-no binary society. It's much more complicated and layered than that. I don't believe this brave bill will get through, but that doesn't mean we don't fight for it. I've just written a column for The Australian today on my favourite aphorism, and it was uttered by the wonderful Pablo Casals on his 80th birthday. Casals, arguably the greatest cellist of the 20th century, certainly the greatest of the first part of the 20th century. And having survived all the horrors of Spain, there he was as an old man, well, he lived another 10 years, talking to the media in Madrid. And he was going on and on with all the horror stories, and you and I could write a list of all of the climate changes, there's a beauty. You could write a list of all the horrors. Well, he went through the list that came to him. And then he shut up for a minute, and the silence fell, and you could see him thinking. And he said two sentences which don't fit together at all, and yet they blend perfectly. The two sentences were, the situation is hopeless. We must take the next step. Now you all get it, don't you? The situation around us is hopeless in every way. Climate change, the response to that, hopeless. The response to global injustice, national injustice, hopeless. The response to ecological disaster, even without climate change, hopeless. The response to pandemics, to AIDS, pretty hopeless. But that is no excuse for not keeping going. We probably won't win this fight. Please, we've got to try and win it. But we must realise that it is an event. I'm sorry, that it is not an event, it is a process. We will finally win at one day. But this step, the next step, and it's a bloody big step, is crucial to take. And remember what happened in Darwin. We're not left-wing, dangerous Bolsheviks like this woman were pushing the barrier, but ultra-conservatives. And other ultra-conservatives stopped it in Canberra. Ladies and gentlemen, we are, they say tax, and what is it that's inevitable? Death and taxes. Well, Kerry Packer proved that paying taxes wasn't inevitable. But death got him. And it will get us all. It will even get the politicians who vote against the sanity of this legislation. But we will finally win, because incrementally, because of all those little steps that Casals is advocating, we have come a hell of a long way in terms of justice and decency and sanity in the last century. The situation is hopeless. We must take the next step.
Thanks, Philip. I'm going to ask if Loredana would like to say something briefly to the room. Would you like to, Loredana?
Yes, could I just...
Yeah, there's a microphone coming up.
Thank you. It's harder for me to speak. It's getting more difficult, but I really could empathise with Gillian, when Gillian spoke, and I thought, that's exactly how I feel. I have multiple sclerosis. I'm 63. I've had it for at least 36 years. And now my voice is going, my mouth, I can't speak very loudly. But I've been very positive, but I'm wearing out. I've had it. I've got a colostomy and a catheter. And I think if I could get, as before, if I could get somebody to speak, one of the people on the right who disagree with euthanasia, I don't know why they won't speak to me. As Philip said, well, I believe that they're too scared to bring up all the issues that I would bring up that they don't want to face. That's about all I can say.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Lorna.
Thank you.
Anybody have some questions for Philip? Yes, lady in the front row here.
I've got a very loud voice.
Oh, no, it doesn't work.
Terrifyingly loud.
Actually, it's more, I just wanted to say something, and that is that I think I quite agree with what Philip was alluding to, which is that doctors, it's very difficult for them necessarily to be involved in euthanasia. I think it's a matter for people to become responsible and find out how to do it for themselves. There are many people who are able to do this and who can impart the knowledge. And I don't think it is fair to leave the whole blooming kettle of fish up to the medical profession. It is our lives, and we should find out how to deal with our own end just exactly when it feels like the right time for us to do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip, for your presentation. It's fantastic. One of the comments that you made, which I think we all recognise, and that is that it's unlikely that, given the composition of the current New South Wales Parliament, that Kate's bill will pass. I think we should nevertheless make sure that there is a really strong public support for it. And I think when the bill eventually does get to be debated in the upper house, hopefully everyone in this room and many other members will be join us for perhaps a vigil or a demonstration outside the front of Parliament House, and hopefully if we can get lots and lots of media attention as we have today, that surely at some point the anti-democratic status of this situation will become almost too difficult for even the politicians to be able to deny. And I think that's something that we want to do.
Could I say something? The last speaker, or the last one before that, mentioned that doctors don't, you should do it yourself. Don't ask doctors. But what does somebody like me do when my only hand and my left one gave up working a year ago? I cannot use my body, my hands or arms or anything. I have to have help. But I cannot get people to help me to die because it's illegal. So what do I do? That's my question.
Please understand, I'm not saying that all doctors will refuse. One of my daughters is a doctor, and I'm sure that when the time comes, if I asked her, she'd do the right thing for her dad. I think what we'll have to have, finally, is, in a sense, hospitals that are identified. You know, so one hospital, it is known that the staff there will be involved in such a procedure, and hospitals where you damn well know they won't. Kerry Packer, however, was once facing death at St Vinny's, and I hope the story never leaves this room. I tell you this in strict confidence. And I went in, and Kerry's wired up to 500 television monitors, which I thought was hilarious, given the ownership of the Nine Network. And he was laughing away because he'd just given $1 million cheque to St Vinny's on the basis that he'd be put to rest if and when he required it. And he said, everyone's got their price. But please don't repeat that.
Okay, look, there are a lot of hands going up right at the moment, and we do have an extended period of, I think we'll just blend this into general discussion. They can be questions for Philip, or they can be really about anything that's gone on this afternoon.